My stepsister convinced my dying father that I was only visiting him for money. The last time I saw him, he spat, "You're just like your mother." But 3 months later, when the old voicemail played on my broken phone, "You're just like your mother." Those were the last words my father said to me. Not quietly, not sadly, not even in passing. He spat them like venom. I was sitting at the edge of his hospital bed, holding his hand, trying to keep my composure while he was drifting in and out of consciousness. The cancer had gotten to his brain by then. At least, that's what I told myself. Behind me, my stepsister Delilah stood with her arms folded. She didn't say anything. She just watched. She always watched. It wasn't until 3 months later, after I dropped my phone in the sink and tried to power it back on, that I saw the unheard voicemail. It was dated 2 days before he died. When I finally heard it, through the cracked audio of a water-damaged speaker, I just sat there and cried. Because he hadn't meant it. He hadn't meant what he said to me. And that's when I realized the damage Delilah did went deeper than I thought. My name is Marcus. I'm 38 now, but this all started when I was 35 and got a call I didn't expect. I grew up in Ashland, Oregon. Small, scenic, with the kind of theater scene that attracts older retirees and weirdly enthusiastic drama kids. My parents split when I was 12. Not a slow, quiet fade, more like a firebomb. One minute we were a regular family watching Jeopardy on a Thursday night, and the next, my mother was loading up a U-Haul with Paolo, the landscape designer who always brought her extra mulch and called her Bella. Dad never forgave her. And when he looked at me, I don't think he could separate her from me. I had her eyes, her voice, her way of walking into a room and noticing what needed to be fixed. None of that earned me favor. If anything, it just meant I was a mirror he didn't want to look into. He remarried quickly. Too quickly. Her name was Miriam, and she was, fine, I guess. Clinical, practical, always polite. She had a daughter, Delilah, who was 2 years older than me and seemed like the type of girl who was always auditioning for something, whether it was affection, praise, or sympathy. Delilah had a talent for finding the angle. She could make people feel sorry for her in 3 sentences flat, and she used that like currency. As teenagers, we were oil and water. She called me emo before it was cool. I called her a smiling vulture under my breath. Our truce was distance. I moved to Portland for college and stayed there, only coming back for obligatory visits. Fast forward to 2022. I'm teaching English at a public high school, living a quiet life, still single, no kids, decent apartment in the Northeast Side. Then one afternoon I get a call from Delilah. "Marcus, it's Dad. He's sick. Really sick." I hadn't talked to her in 2 years. I don't think we even followed each other on social media anymore. She said he'd been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. That the prognosis was bad. That the doctors gave him 6 months, maybe less. And that he was asking about me. "He wants to see you," she said. I hesitated. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to step back into that house and not feel 12 years old again. But I went. Took time off work, packed a bag, drove 5.5 hours through I-5 in a steady rain, and stayed overnight in Medford before finally pulling into the driveway I hadn't seen in 5 years. The house looked smaller. The yard was tidier. The old oak tree was gone, replaced with decorative rocks and some store-bought garden statues. One of them was a gnome wearing sunglasses. I hated it on sight. Delilah greeted me like we were old friends. "You look good," she said, reaching for a hug I didn't return fully. "He's in the back room. It's been tough." She trailed off as if that explained everything. And in a way, it did. My dad looked like a ghost of himself. Skin sagging in places that used to be strong. Eyes sunken, hair thinner than I remembered. He smiled faintly when I walked in, but it was the kind of smile people give out of obligation. We talked. Briefly. I told him I took some time off work. I brought a photo album, the old one we used to keep in the TV cabinet. It had pictures from my childhood, before the divorce. He didn't say much. Just looked through it silently. That night, I slept on the couch. Delilah made sure to remind me that the guest room is full of hospice supplies, which meant the couch was the only option. I didn't argue. Over the next few days, I visited him every morning. Sat by his side. Helped with little things. Brought him lemon drops because I remembered he liked those when he had a sore throat. But something was off. He seemed guarded. Suspicious. One afternoon, after I helped him change into a clean shirt, he said, "You still working in Portland?" "Yeah. Teaching high school." "Must be hard." "You driving back and forth?" "No, just staying here a few days." He paused. "That can't be cheap." I shrugged it off. Later, Delilah pulled me aside while we were washing dishes. "He's confused lately," she said softly. "He keeps asking me if you're only here to talk about the will." I told him that's crazy, but, you know how he gets. And that's when I started to realize what she was doing. Delilah was planting seeds. Quietly. Carefully. Making him question why I was there. Turning grief into paranoia. Making herself the trusted gatekeeper while casting me as the opportunist. I should have said something. But I didn't. I just kept showing up, trying to be the good son. Until that final morning. He was barely lucid. I sat beside him, held his hand, told him I'd be back later. He turned, stared straight at me, and said with more strength than I expected, "You're just like your mother." His voice cracked like a whip. The bitterness in those 5 words hit harder than anything I'd felt in years. Delilah stood behind me, silent. I left that afternoon. Drove the whole way home in one go. Didn't answer her texts. Didn't go to the funeral. I didn't even know if they had one. 3 months later, my phone slipped out of my hand and landed screen first in a sink full of dishes. I cursed, yanked it out, dried it, powered it on. The screen glitched. A few apps wouldn't open. But somehow, the voicemail app still worked. One new voicemail. Dated 2 days before he died. The voice was weak. Full of static. "Marcus. I don't know what's real anymore. I keep thinking of your mother and how she lied. And Delilah keeps saying you're only here for what I have left. But I don't know anymore. My mind feels like Swiss cheese. But you held my hand. You brought the album. That meant something. If I said anything wrong, I'm sorry." Click. That was it. Just enough to shatter me. I sat on the edge of my bed for almost an hour after that voicemail played. I kept replaying it, putting the speaker up to my ear, then switching to headphones, then just watching the waveform bounce across the cracked screen. The audio was garbled, like it was struggling to break through from another world. But the words were there. He was trying to reach me. He doubted her. He doubted Delilah. Even in the end. And that doubt, that single moment of clarity, meant more to me than I can explain. It didn't erase the last words he ever said to me, not really. But it put them in context. The fog of a dying mind. The pressure of manipulation. The cruelty of someone who knew how to twist love into leverage. I didn't tell anyone about the voicemail at first. I wasn't ready. It felt too personal, too raw. Like I had been handed something sacred, but I didn't know what to do with it. Instead, I just sat with it. And as I did, the anger started to creep in. Not at my father. I'd been angry at him for most of my life. That wasn't new. I was angry at her. Delilah had made him believe I came to scavenge the leftovers of a life I barely had a part in. She used her access, her proximity, her polished innocence, to become the authority on my intentions. And when he couldn't think clearly for himself anymore, she fed him a version of me that fit her story. I didn't even know what he left behind. She never told me. No one did. I hadn't asked. But now, I started to wonder. Not because I wanted anything, but because I needed to know what she took. I called Miriam a few days later. We hadn't spoken since the funeral, one I wasn't invited to. She answered on the third ring. "Oh," she said, flatly. "Marcus." "Hi." A pause. "Is something wrong?" "No," I said. "Just needed to ask you something." More silence. Then I just came out with it. "What did the will say?" She exhaled audibly, as if she'd been waiting for this call. "Everything went to Delilah. The house, his pension, the savings. All of it. He signed the papers about 3 weeks before he passed. Said he didn't want to deal with lawyers after the fact. Just wanted it clean. I didn't say anything. He told me he didn't trust you," she added, like she couldn't help herself. "Said you were showing up too late. That you only came when you heard he was dying." I let that sit. Then I said, "He left me a voicemail." Now she was the one who went quiet. "I'm not calling to contest the will," I said. "I just thought you should know." He was confused. He wasn't sure. He said Delilah told him I was only there for the inheritance. But he wasn't sure. I expected some kind of reaction. Denial, maybe. Defensiveness. But Miriam just sighed. "I don't know what you want from me," she said finally. "Harold made his decisions. Whether they were the right ones or not, that's between you and him." Click. That was it. That conversation haunted me more than I expected. Because it wasn't just what she said, it was how easily she accepted it. Like truth didn't matter anymore. Like the story Delilah crafted had already replaced the real one. And that's when I started pulling on threads. I called my cousin Raina, who lived in Eugene. We hadn't spoken much, but she was one of the few people who still checked in with my dad over the years. She also happened to be an estate lawyer. "I'm not trying to sue anyone," I told her. "But something doesn't sit right." He left a voicemail. He said Delilah was putting things in his head. I think he was manipulated. And I think he regretted it. He just didn't get the chance to fix it. I sent her the audio file. She listened while I waited in silence on the other end of the line. When it ended, she said, "Jesus. Then, you're not the first person I've talked to with a situation like this. Undue influence is hard to prove, but not impossible. Especially if there's evidence he was in cognitive decline." "I'm not trying to win anything in court," I repeated. "I just want the truth known." "I get that," she said. "But you should still protect yourself. Delilah isn't going to just let this sit quietly." That made me pause. Why would she care? She got everything. People like her don't care about the stuff. They care about the narrative. If you threaten the version of herself she's selling, she'll come after you. I didn't want to believe that. But deep down, I knew she was right. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just a local Ashland postmark. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. Typed. It read, "Let it go, Marcus. He made his choice. You weren't there when it counted. Stop trying to rewrite history." No name. No signature. No doubt who it was from. I stared at the paper for a long time. Not because I was afraid. Because I was done being quiet. I didn't respond to the letter. Not because I didn't want to, believe me, I had drafts. Angry ones. Calm ones. One where I quoted the voicemail word for word and told her she could choke on her own self-righteousness. But I didn't send any of them. Because sending a letter back would have given her what she wanted, the satisfaction of knowing she got under my skin. She needed me to react to reinforce her version of things, that I was bitter, that I was unstable, that I was dangerous to her peace. So instead, I waited. 2 weeks after I got that letter, I made the drive back to Ashland. This time, not out of guilt or obligation. This time, I was going for clarity. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I parked across the street from the old house and just sat in the car for a while. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Same gnome on the front porch. Same fake smile in ceramic. The house was dark except for a single light upstairs. I didn't plan on going in. I wasn't there to trespass or make a scene. I just wanted to see it again with my own eyes. The place where everything shifted. The place where I came to say goodbye to a man who never really let me in, and who, even in his final moments, was robbed of the clarity he tried so hard to find. Instead of confronting Delilah, I visited the cemetery. My father didn't have a gravestone. Miriam told me he didn't want one. I don't know if I believe that or if it was another cost-saving measure disguised as preference. But there was a plaque at the cemetery wall, small, brass, easy to miss. Harold Wren 1949 to 2022 teacher. Reader. Quiet soul. That was it. No mention of family. No son. No stepdaughter. No hint of the mess behind that four-word epitaph. I sat on the bench nearby and played the voicemail again. I must have listened to it 100 times by then. I knew every pause, every breath. But that time, it hit me differently. He wasn't just confused. He was scared. Scared he couldn't trust his own mind. Scared the people around him were lying. Scared that maybe he'd pushed away the only person who still wanted to be there just because. And now he was gone. And I was still here, holding both the truth and the damage it caused. I left the cemetery feeling hollow. But also clearer than I had in months. I decided to tell the story. Not to lawyers. Not to Delilah. Not to the rest of my already fractured extended family. But to the one place I knew someone might actually listen without trying to fix it, a support group I found online, made up of people who had been estranged from parents, manipulated by siblings, or iced out of family legacies they'd tried so hard to protect. I posted the voicemail. I told the story as plainly as I could. I left out names, dates, cities, but I didn't leave out the betrayal. And the responses poured in. Hundreds of them. People telling me their parents had believed lies too. That their step-siblings had rewritten history with a smile. That they'd held hands at deathbeds only to be told, "Where were you before?" Some said I should fight. Some said I should let it go. But almost all of them said this: "You were there. That matters." And slowly, it started to matter to me, too. A few months passed. Life returned to its slow rhythm. I got back into the groove at work. My students, bless them, knew nothing about the storm I'd walked through. I started keeping the chessboard my father taught me on in the classroom. It became a little corner where students could challenge me during lunch breaks. One day, a quiet kid named Nolan beat me in 6 moves. "Dude," he said, eyes wide. "Are you even trying?" I smiled. "Not hard enough, apparently." He nodded sagely. "My dad says losing teaches you more than winning." I stared at him. That hit harder than it should have. It wasn't until that winter that I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in over a decade. Subject line: "You probably don't remember me." It was from a woman named Tessa, a family friend, my dad's former colleague. She and her husband had come over for dinners when I was a kid. One of the few people from his side of the world who'd ever shown me kindness. She wrote, "Marcus, I just heard about your father. I'm sorry. I know things were never easy between you two, but he talked about you often. Quietly, and not always kindly, but I think he was more hurt than angry. I also heard some things about Delilah that, well, I didn't know who else to tell. She reached out to several of us before he passed, told us not to contact him in his final weeks because he wasn't up for visitors. Some of us tried anyway. He wouldn't take our calls. We thought he was shutting down. But maybe he wasn't. Maybe he never even got the messages. That email shattered something in me all over again. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. Delilah hadn't just poisoned my father against me. She'd isolated him entirely. Tessa's email lit something in me. I knew Delilah had manipulated my father. I suspected she had cut me out of his final days intentionally. But hearing that she'd also blocked others from saying goodbye? That was something different. That was calculated. I waited a couple of days before I responded to her. "Do you still have the messages you sent him?" I asked. She did. Voicemails. Emails. Even an old birthday card she'd mailed and got back, returned unopened with moved scribbled and unfamiliar handwriting across the envelope. I started collecting more. It wasn't hard. A few messages to extended family, some of Dad's old colleagues, an old neighbor or two. It turned out Delilah had created a very tight ring around him those last few weeks. And she hadn't just discouraged visits, in some cases, she'd outright told people he didn't want to see them. Some were polite enough to respect it. Others weren't so sure, but backed off out of guilt or awkwardness. And a handful, like Tessa, had been quietly heartbroken ever since. "I wish I'd pushed harder," she wrote in a follow-up message. He deserved better. No one knew what I was building. I wasn't going to court. I wasn't going to threaten her. I was going to do something far worse to someone like Delilah, expose her. I reached out to a former student of mine, Karina, who now worked for a small but scrappy podcast in Portland that focused on real stories of family betrayal, gaslighting, and emotional manipulation. They were always looking for nuanced, quiet stories that had slipped through the cracks. I gave her everything. The voicemail. The returned letters. Tessa's story. Mine. Delilah's voice never appeared in the podcast. She wasn't named. Neither was my father. But the story was unmistakably ours. The title? He said I was just like my mother. Then I found the voicemail. The episode went live quietly. No fanfare. No press. Just an episode buried in a weekly drop. But word spreads fast in small towns like Ashland. A few of my father's old friends reached out, quietly but clearly aware of who the story was about. The next time I drove down to visit his plaque, I noticed something new. The gnome on the porch? Gone. In its place was a small wooden sign staked into the front lawn that read, "For sale by owner." Delilah was moving. I never saw her in person again, but she sent me one last email. "I know what you did. You twisted everything to make yourself the victim. You had no right. You didn't even care about him until the end." I didn't respond. Because I didn't need to. Her world, the curated version of herself that she sold to others, had cracked. And it didn't take violence. It didn't take screaming. It just took the truth, finally spoken out loud. I ended up buying the chessboard back from a second-hand shop. Same one I'd learned on. I put it in my classroom, and it's now part of something I call Silent Fridays, where the students can play while I grade, and no one's allowed to speak above a whisper. There's a kind of peace in that. The voicemail is saved in 3 places now. A backup hard drive. A cloud server. And a USB key that I keep in my desk drawer. Not because I play it anymore, I don't. But because I want to remember that sometimes, even in the fog of confusion and manipulation, people try to do the right thing before it's too late. My father tried. And that counts for something. Delilah lives in Santa Fe now, based on the latest gossip thread from a mutual cousin. She's in real estate again. Her face is on billboards. Her smile still sells sunshine and glass kitchens. But the people who knew us, the ones who mattered, they remember. They know who she really is now. And that's all I ever wanted. If you made it this far, thanks for reading. I didn't write this for revenge. Not really. I wrote it for the people who've been silenced, doubted, erased from their own families. If that's you, and you're still holding on to something, a voicemail, a letter, a photo, a truth, don't let anyone tell you it doesn't matter. Sometimes, the truth is the only inheritance we really need. And sometimes, it's enough.